So I realized as I was leading the meditation that as I really open us up to feeling the suffering that's in the body, contemplating the suffering that's there. It's probably a better word. It doesn't negate everything I've said about enjoyment. So all previous instructions apply. you know, all previous instructions apply. And so it may be part of our, dance of becoming skillful around this to not fixate on the suffering, not make the suffering color everything. And it's part of, finding the right relationship to it. And it's right there in the meditation. It's what I love about meditation is a little laboratory for life, and the things that happen in it are just quite similar to the things that happen everywhere. It's just there's a greater intentionality around actually noticing and relating to it. And so in the body is a great place to learn how to be with suffering. And so, given each individual person, some people may find it harder to sit for 30 minutes. There may be more discomfort. There may be more restlessness. There may be, and that may vary from sitting to sitting. Some sittings you may be just blissed out, and others it's like you don't want to be here. There's something that just is making it very difficult to just be. And so we watch that as we go through a practice. That's what a practice is for, is to have there be enough regularity that you see how changeable our human experience is, how changeable this meditation thing is. Our egos think that they're supposed to become skillful about like getting the result, getting this thing out of it that I want or that I'm told I should get or whatever. So that I can prove I'm a good ego. I can prove I can control my experience to get what I want. And I just love meditation because it just, something about it just laughs at that. It's like, this is not going to work. It's got to be a different sort of relationship to what's happening here. And gradually you can learn to quiet that and to find out how to just receive what's actually present and to let go of your ideas of how it's supposed to be and your demands on it. There's so much to be learned just in the sitting about compassion and about relating to the way that the body suffers, the way that we undergo things that are not necessarily according to our preferences. So, I thought, where to start in terms of talking about suffering, talking about being with suffering, which is compassion, sort of opening our hearts to suffering. If I can sort of define suffering, for as much as definitions help, it's about opening our heart to this aspect of human experience. We've all been suffering all our lives. What is different is the opening the heart to it, letting it actually touch your heart, letting it actually change you in a certain way. Sometimes when we think of compassion, we think of that as something we offer to others, we offer to the world, and there's certainly a truth to that. But you might think sometimes suffering is an offering to you, in as much as it invites your heart to open. It can change you, being touched by the suffering of yourself and others. And, part of my understanding is that they go together, sort of like being skillful with your own suffering helps you to be skillful with anyone else's. And they're really, in some ways, the same skill. And we'll begin, I think, with the simple task of seeing suffering. Now, many of you may say, oh, I see suffering all the time. I'm an old hat at that. And of course, there's a truth to it. When you are suffering in a certain way, you do notice it. Um, but I mean something different. I mean something closer to contemplate suffering. That this is a learning about suffering. This is a being curious about suffering. And those are kind of the initial ways to open the heart. I think the most accessible ways to open the heart is to turn towards something that maybe you don't like, that maybe it doesn't feel good, that is suffering, and to be curious about it, to be willing to learn about it, and to see it clearly. This is coming with, there is a whole kind of compassion practice in Theravada Buddhism that, it's very similar to loving kindness practice. And that's not exactly what I'm planning to teach in this class. Something similar to loving kindness, but it's more focused on suffering. And you repeat in your head this sort of phrase, which is, may you be free of suffering. You could say that to your body, you could say that to your mind, you could say that to another person, so forth. There's a whole practice around that. And I may incorporate that some in terms of this instruction. But as I was feeling into this class, I felt this real draw towards the Four Noble Truths and really teaching about that in the light of compassion. And if you're unfamiliar with the Four Noble Truths, they will become more familiar to you. It's a profound teaching, a simple teaching. And the very first of the Four Noble Truths is one word, dukkha, which is translated as suffering and dissatisfaction. And there's a third thing, and suddenly I'm blanking on the third. That's suffering. And I'm suffering a loss of memory. But anyway, the word dukkha is just one word. Sometimes you'll find it translated as life is suffering, and certain people say that's the first noble truth. It's actually not accurate. There's no kind of blanket description of life as suffering. That's, I think, something that comes out of kind of a strain of Theravada Buddhism, but I don't think it's the actual most important word. And so the beginning of awakening in a compassionate way is to notice the existence, the sheer fact of dukkha, of suffering. This may be harder than it seems. I have a neighbor who sometimes walks the dog with us, and she talks kind of incessantly, and I get a little irritated with that, And she's a sensitive enough soul that she knows that I get irritated with it, and she wants to please me. And anyway, there's this whole kind of dynamic. And so sometimes I just notice suffering. And there's a little phrase that comes right from the suttas, which I find to be just so powerful. Idang sukham. This is suffering. This is suffering. And so it kind of cuts through all the analysis, all the kind of, there's something that happens when I just notice, okay, there's this kind of irritation about the talking. That's suffering. It cuts through kind of all the egoic stuff of, oh, I shouldn't be irritated with her. They can kind of, I'm better than that sort of thing that can be a part of my mind. Or the, oh, she doesn't notice me kind of thing. Or she's like, all this sort of stuff that can go through the mind around a simple experience of, say, someone talking a lot and not tuning in. That's often a part of talking a lot is you don't tune in to the other person that you're walking with. And all the kind of my stuff that comes up around that. Rather than analyzing it, try to make it go away, fix it, just contemplate it. This is suffering. I actually find that actually relaxes it more than anything. It's just that simple statement. This is suffering. And to recognize, someone who's kind of talking a lot without tuning in, there's a kind of suffering to that too. Now, suffering, as I'm using it, it's not necessarily about pain. Sometimes people are suffering and you can't really see that they're in pain. The word suffering, I want to go to Latin with this because the word compassion is a Latinate word. And the word passion is in it, passio, which is the part of the Latin word for to undergo something. Okay? You undergo something, which means something acts upon you or your sense of self, and you undergo it. And so, even though maybe somebody who's talking a lot isn't suffering, in some ways they're releasing something by their talking a lot, and it feels more natural to them than listening does. But they're undergoing something. It's not a choice. It's not exactly a choice. It's something they undergo. So that's part of the meaning of suffering as I'm using it. And so when I say this is suffering, there's also just this sort of glimmer of, the way that she and I, both of us, undergo things. We're not just engineered according to our ego's design of the ideal person that our egos think we should be. We're not. We undergo things. We have reactivity. And the beginning, the first step, is the first noble truth of dukkha, suffering. You could say suffering exists. Here it is, suffering. Suffering. And for a moment, when I use this phrase, this is suffering, I'm contemplating what it is to be human. I'm letting what it is to be human touch my heart. Whatever you think the word contemplation means, that could send you somewhere else, okay? But what I mean in the context of this class is when you actually move into contemplation, you're letting the reality, the human reality, touch your heart. She is this way. There's not a lot of control about that. There's not a lot of choice about that. She undergoes something that is in her personality, in the kind of protective system that her personality developed early on. And I too, I'm in there with her. I've got this other thing in my personality, and it has its reaction. It undergoes its stuff. And here we are, two human beings. And this is what it's like to be human. It feels so different to me than, I got to fix this. I got to be better than this. I got to relieve the suffering. If I were a good Buddhist, I'd know how to not suffer here. There's my Buddhist ego right there on parade. And it's not actually all that helpful. Buddhist egos are actually not helpful at all. They happen. If you hang around in the Dharma enough, it's very likely chance that you'll start having a Buddhist identity and you'll start having a Buddhist ego. And you'll start kind of messing with yourself in a way that's not skillful because of that, okay? So I feel like I'm giving you the Dharma straight when I say the place to begin is with this contemplation. This is suffering. And when I say this is suffering, my heart opens to the human situation, and in doing that, it opens to her. A lot of the irritation just falls away. And you could say I'm fixing the problem that way, but I really think intention matters. And if I were only saying this phrase because I don't want to feel irritation, I want my irritation to go away, so my Buddhist ego feels good, and I don't have to feel irritation, life is more pleasant, all that kind of intentionality, it's not bad. But I think what will take you the deepest is that intentionality to know the human situation, to know what it is to be human, and to know suffering, to be actually open to that. And it actually accomplishes the same thing. It actually liberates from suffering. But it does so with such a light hand, such a non-egoic kind of hand. Just say, This is suffering. Just a recognition. This is suffering. You know, we all have these things in our life. I actually picked a very minor irritation in my life. It's not that big of a deal. But I picked it because this is life. You know, life is composed of a lot of these things, of a lot of situations of being human where there's suffering. We all have that. And I think it's helpful. I've found it helpful to use this word undergo as an understanding. So compassion is to be with this aspect of being human, the way we undergo things, the way our existence is not completely free as embodied beings. And a great place to begin with that is the body. You know, the poor body, it undergoes things, right? You cut your finger open on the chopping block, you know, the poor body suffers. And then the mind suffers. The mind suffers like, oh, geez, why did I do that? That was dumb. You know, like regret, remorse kind of comes up immediately. You shoot what's called the second arrow. You just cut your finger, that hurts. And then you hit yourself with this other thing that also hurts. The sense of, I failed. I somehow did something. You know, you just cut your hand. It happens. The knife slips. It happens. And so, where to start with that? Just acknowledge suffering. You know, and you have to kind of work yourself back a little bit from the mind that wants to blame yourself, to the poor finger that hurts. And go get a Band-Aid. Deal with it. You know, clean out the blood, whatever it takes. Cut it really badly, you know, then you gotta deal with that. Maybe as I'm talking, you can kind of get the feel for it. There's a neutrality that's really helpful in This is Suffering. It brings us back to the sanity, a certain way of seeing things for what they are. And believe it or not, that is a doorway to the heart opening. The sanity of just seeing, okay, things are this way. And to the insanity that is resisting things the way they are. That spews on, this reactivity to that thing. Or there's just like, okay, this is what it is. Your neighbor voices a political opinion you don't agree with. There's all sorts of choices there. But you might notice suffering. You might notice what you undergo in that experience, which is often a reactivity that is not necessarily going to put you in the best place to make a response. But there it is. And whatever's going on in that person, whatever life history led to that opinion, believe me, there's probably some suffering there. There's probably some undergoing that's going on there too. So this is all kind of happening on this level. And of course, there can be this other kind of level above that of like what to say and various skill about that, so forth. That's a different class. That's not this class. This class is about that basic level of what we undergo. And, you know, I often undergo this smart ass who wants to zing him back. Is that going to do anybody any good? I actually don't think so. You know, wounding someone rarely makes them better. I don't actually think it ever makes them better, but I'm open to an example of that, so I'll keep that over. But wounding someone, you know, wounding their pride, being, you know, kind of sharp with them, it rarely makes people better. You can be very direct with people and get away with it if it's coming from a certain place. But what I know in myself, what I want to do is to cause pain. I want to make someone suffer. when I want to zing them. There's just this little me that wants to do that. And so that's suffering. Not speaking from that, that's skillful, and that's avoiding suffering, okay? But that's also a different class. This is like just being with that level of like everything that you can't quite stop from happening. That's suffering. That's when you can't stop yourself from going down some path. Say this is suffering, because that's what it is. You're just like being carried down this current. But there's something different when you're actually willing to contemplate it, because it turns it into a moment of knowing what it is to be human. Knowing this about being human. Because, and this is a helpful thought, skillful thought, we're not that different from each other. We are not that different from each other. What goes on here probably goes on there. A little different, little different ideation around it, little different thoughts, little different opinions, maybe big difference in opinions. But the basic stuff of kind of what we undergo, we're not that different from each other. And the more you're willing to actually contemplate it in yourself, the more you're actually going to be willing to meet it in others and develop a certain skill around that. So I'm just checking to see if there's anything else I wanted to cover. So, going into this week, let's just try this out. This is our homework. Besides doing the meditation every day, it's your homework. I know you're not necessarily all of you going to do it, but I always encourage you to, because it really helps. And the classes are really a great kind of leg up to get it established in your life. But in addition to that, begin to notice suffering. Begin to use this lens, which is like the first of the Eightfold Path, another of those Buddhist lists, right view. How to actually see what's happening clearly. Suffering is really important. To see suffering for what it is. And then the body and the mind, it's kind of a convenient kind of way to divide it up. See, the suffering of the body, suffering of the physical, and then the suffering of this mind that we are. Both of them. And of course they interact. They always interact. And then come back and talk about it. I guess the other thing I can kind of say about the homework, because of course the meditation's recorded, you may want to listen to it again through the week. And I definitely introduced the idea in the meditation of opening your heart to something. And I want that to be sort of like a Zen koan for you. Of like, okay, Mark says open your heart to it. What the hell? What does that mean? In this moment. Don't think too much about it, but it's actually, I think, the case that open your heart, it speaks past the mind in a certain way. And something can shift just of itself when that's a suggestion. And when you use the phrase, this is suffering, believe it or not, you're inviting your heart to open. Just in the recognition of what is. There's something that's just opening. So you may not figure out how to open your heart. And if you're looking to me to tell you how to do it, I'm afraid I'm going to disappoint you. I'll do my best. But in a certain way, there isn't an instruction manual. But you can notice what happens in yourself when you do certain things and begin to get a sense of the how of it. And the heart is kind of a mystery. And there are skillful things to do. There are kind of hacks, so to speak, to use the new word, the new lingo. There are hacks to opening your heart. I just gave you one in those words. But it's a bit of a mystery. What's going to make this go like this? It has a mind of its own. Your heart has a mind of its own. And it doesn't necessarily respond to the doer in terms of what it does. But it does respond to kind of the invitation, like open your heart. Something hears, something might respond. So that kind of goes with this first week's homework, is as you say, this is suffering, or as you notice suffering in the body, you might just kind of also drop that in, open your heart to it, and see what happens. See what works, see what doesn't work, or just notice what responds to that. All of that. Okay.